Hello, everyone, and welcome to UFO Enigma. I'm Ron Rickey, your host. Now, the last few weeks we've been more or less covering a lot of the United States sightings, and there are other things going on in the world, so not to neglect some of the foreign sightings which have been piling up on my desk. We're going to cover some pretty interesting little stories here. Now, we have a couple of new hotspots in England, and they're not in Warminster, which I've covered on a couple shows. These are different towns. These little sightings here come out of the towns of Bedford and the Ipswich areas. And I also received a pretty nice little article from out of Canada's Yukon territory. It was complete with a photograph and everything. And if we have time, we'll finish off with a pretty nice little abduction case from Wales. Okay, now let's get to it. Here's the first story from England. This is from Bedford, and it's out of the Bedford Shire Times, Bedford, England. The date line was October 28th of last year. Headline reads, "Close Encounters Prompt New Probe into UFOs." Now, this article here tells of many strange occurrences in and around the town of Bedford, England, and went on to say that two men, Kenneth Parsons and Charles Allen, have recently formed an investigating group to study some of these local phenomena that are appearing on a regular basis. And it seems like interest is high, because they said there in 1 month they amassed a membership of 14 members, and that's pretty good. They call it the Bedford Earth and Aerial Mystery Society, BEAMS for short. Cute little name. Now, as the article went on, there is a military air base nearby, and if you've been watching, sightings around air bases are very, very common, and they just want to, I guess they just want to see what's going on. And these guys here have listed some pretty good sightings in and around that particular air base. Okay, now, let's get to the first sighting. This one was a sighting of 10 triangular-shaped UFOs flying over and around the Cranfield airfield. Now, this is the military base. The objects were orange in color, and all of them had a kind of white ring around them. Whether it was a halo glow a la Gulf Breeze, the type 1s and 2s, it didn't say. But witnesses, one a soldier and his girlfriend, said they were watching them, and they were definitely not planes or helicopters. The objects were described as being about 20 feet long and were flying about 200 meters above the ground. I guess that would be about 900 feet or so. And back in March of '94, the Society took a report of a black UFO. That first one, the 10, was not too much information on it. Now, this black UFO was shaped, the description was given the shape of a guitar pick, and it was quite small. They estimated the size of being 5 feet in diameter. Now, this could have been a robot or a probe or something like that. It wasn't really clearly given out. Okay, now, that was the two of the little ones. You're going to have to catch the whole ball of wax here in this one here, because individually these reports might be, kind of mundane, but you got to lump them together. Now, in January of '94, another UFO was reported over an embankment in Bedford. The object appeared to be made of one-way mirrors, and the observers could see a driver's cabin in the center. Now, that was interesting, because that was the first one in a long time where they could see a driver's compartment, a pilot's compartment. And the one-way mirror description is new also. Now, we may be hearing a few more stories coming out of this town because they haven't been any stranger at all to odd events. And the article did wind up by giving some examples of the things that had been going on there. And I tried to get this more or less in chronological. I might have messed up a little bit. But November of 1956, residents claimed contact with alien being. Now, this was in the town of Shefford. Now, these would be all little towns in and around Bedford, like if you're in Easton, it would encompass Stoughton, Raynham, anything that came in from that 10-mile area probably would be reported there. Now, a little bit before that, a little after that, was Little Bafford. This was June of 70. Now, a crocodile was seen in the river Osa. And in Studham Common in 1967, children see a little blue man with a tall hat who disappeared. In Lutton, on November of 72, a ghost was spotted in a factory. And in Bedford in 74, witnesses saw a humanoid figure near a power station. Now, Hawcliffe, England, April 78, a kangaroo was spotted. And in 79, back in Bedford, tiny frogs and spawn fell on a rainy day. And in 79 again, a hitchhiker disappeared after being observed being picked up. He disappeared. Now, in the town of Lutton again and Toddington, a lion was spotted. And Amped Hill in 83, a large slab of ice fell on a girl and her mother while they were working in the garden. Now, it goes right along here. The towns of Heath and Reach, December 8th of 88, a brown bear was seen by 3 people. And then in Dunstable that was in 84, and then in 84 again, in Dunstable, barn was seen to be damaged by ball lightning. Now, that's an interesting thing because although I've seen moving pictures of ball lightning, the actual description of ball lightning being observed by someone is very rare. Someone saw this one hit a barn. Now, in Clop Hill in 93, there was a sighting of a large wildcat. And in 94, what they call the Potton Puma was seen after the early part of the year started. And then in, this one was undated, but it was Eaton Bray, a large black cat, possibly a panther, seen in the underbrush. Okay, that was quite a few little sightings, and there was more. Granted, these really didn't take in the UFO. No UFO was really sighted here except for the alien at the power station and possibly that little blue guy the kids saw. But if you remember, these things do go along with what we're talking about. Now, and a lot of these events may have a reasonable explanation, but it seems to me the animal part, the spotting the bear, the brown bear, with the exception of the bear, might have been a bear in that area, but the lion, the crocodile, the black panther, these are definitely not native to that area. And if I could just go to aside a little bit, when I was doing this show in about the town in New York, Pine Ridge, I think, there's a constant rumbling reported, and things like unfamiliar animals and plant life were found in that particular area. So it's happening there too. Probably happened there first, but it's happening all over. Now, I pointed out, now, there's something that usually common with UFOs and these unusual phenomena, but that's all that little article wrote, so we'll just go on to the next one. Okay, now we'll hit the Canadian story. This was a nice little article. It was about UFOs spotted by one of our northern neighbors there up in Canada. The article is out of the Star in Whitehorse. This is in the Yukon Territory of Canada, and the date line is December 30th of '94. The headline reads, "Men search for explanations for strange lights." Now, the article covers some sightings in and around the Ross River area, and the sightings more or less go back a few years. The first one, which was the more recent one, concerns the sighting of a trapper named Mike Powerchuk, and this was on December 20th of '94. The trapper, whose nickname is Mad Mike, claims that he saw some strange lights that stayed in view for several hours early one morning on the 20th. Now, he claimed that the lights seemed to be some 20 or 30 miles away. The lights were multicolored. They were showing green, blue, red, and white. And now he claims that the lights were definitely not the northern lights, the moon, or a star. So he ruled right out anything that's up in the heavens. He did take a picture, but it didn't come out too good. He is an amateur photographer, and he did start taking some pictures. I had one here, but I was going to blow it up, but I think if I had blown it up, it would have been too grainy. So if anybody would like to look at it, I have it here. On looking at the, let me see now. Although these lights were far away, let's get to this estimated distance now. He said 20 to 30 miles away. If it was that far away, like he estimated, 20 to 30, and he does live in that area, he knows the rivers and he knows the mountains, and whether the thing maybe passed in front of a mountain that he knew was way off in the distance, I don't know. But if it was that far away, he saw something very, very large. And there was a funny little part in the middle here, but the trapper admitted that he had 3 to 4 ounces of rum over a several-hour period. But don't forget, let's get this into perspective. The man's a trapper. He's up in the Yukon in December, so you got to find some way to keep warm. Now, Powerchuk claims that he tried to, as he was watching this, now remember, he had this here for several hours, a couple hours he was watching this, and he tried to signal the UFOs with a flashlight by flashing an SOS. He placed a lantern and a candle in the window to try to get their attention. And he went on to explain that he didn't try to go hide under a blanket or something, and he definitely wasn't scared. He was more interested than anything. Maybe that's because they were 30 miles away. But if they come a little closer, it might have been a different story. Now, after this several-hour period, the lights disappeared, and Powerchuk reported the incident to the Ross River Mounties. Now, later that day, he traveled to the spot where he thought the lights might have been over. But he could find no evidence of a landing or anything like that, no broken bushes or whatever. And he reiterated that very strongly, that I got in this article, that he does not make up stories, and he swears the whole story is the truth. I personally, I believe him. Now, the second part of this article was told of a sighting of a Bill Carson. It was 10 or 12 years ago. Now, Carson spotted some very bright glowing lights that moved slowly through the skies from west to east. Now, this is still in the Ross River area. Carson is a non-believer. This is what makes this kind of interesting because you're getting two angles here. And when asked if what he thought he saw was a UFO, he said he thought they were meteors. Now, the weather had been quite stormy that night, and there was a lot of rain, heavy wind, and a lot of dense clouds. And it seems to me, and it seems to him, I mean, that one of the meteors had struck a mountain in the distance. I had to, read that twice because this is the first time that I've ever heard of a slow-moving meteor. Generally, if you look up in the sky, especially in the summertime, when they come over, if you blink, you've missed it. Now, another men didn't want who didn't want to be identified had a pretty good experience. A few days after the trapper, when he had his sighting, and this was an early morning sighting. This man was he was driving along the Alaska Highway when he saw some bright lights in the sky. They flew in and out of the mountains and stayed in view until he got into the town of Whitehorse. Now this, they probably could have wrote this up a little more, make a little more meat to it, because it looks like he saw more than what they were reporting here. Okay, now the man stopped his car several times to get out and look at the UFO through binoculars. And then he said even though the field glasses were good and strong, he couldn't make out a definite shape of the objects. Now, he also claimed that the UFOs were still in view at 7:30 a.m. This is some 2.5 hours now after he first spotted them. And when he had last seen them, they were over the Whitehorse General Hospital. Now, that's a pretty good sighting. These things kept with him for 2.5 hours while he was driving along. Even if he was doing 50 miles an hour, that's quite a distance to be viewing something. Although distances up in that part of the country are a lot different than here. 200-mile ride up there, you might go up there to get some milk and bread or something. He says the lights were brighter than anything he had seen coming in at an airport, the local airport there, and that he couldn't identify him, even using the binoculars and so many things, he couldn't find out what they were. And that was more or less all the sightings that they had. And the article sort of wound up by quoting an astronomer named Chris Ratowski in Manitoba. Now, he made some pretty interesting statements, but they were kind of confusing to me at first. Rutkowski, he's conducting research in ufology, so I would imagine this is some sort of a committee of something. And it seems to me like in one breath, he says they were getting UFO reports from everybody, including pilots, police, air traffic controllers, etc., that they were coming in, at a pretty good clip. Then he went on to claim that this does not constitute a theme such as the Orson Welles War of the World, where the Martians come down and invade. He's given more or less the scientific stoicness, and he went on to give to say there were a few more UFO sightings than for being kind of dead in that area. He said the UFO sightings in the Yukon in 1993 to 94 were 3 reports. In 92, 1, 91, 1, and in 1991. So I don't know if these reports coming into his committee or what, but it seems that's kind of low. Then he went on to report some of the sightings from this particular time periods that would have a logical explanation. And he gave some information on the national average in Canada, and that was 250 sightings per year, with about 3 to 5% going unexplained. And that more or less follows the formula that Edward Ruppelt gave way back in the 50s when he was in charge of Project Blue Book. Now, he concluded this little interview. He said, this is what sort of confuses me, you know, he says, he went up to 94, and he says, now since he's been compiling reports and stuff, he says he finds an increase in numbers. And he more or less sort of just went over that very quietly. And all in all, I thought this was a pretty good article, especially the sighting from the trapper. I wasn't too impressed with the with some of the semi-official explanations, but you get that around here too. Alrighty, now we see we got the another English sighting here, and this is from the town of Ipswich. I thought this was pretty interesting. Now, this is out of the Suffolk Mercury in Ipswich, and the date line is November 10th of 94. And the title goes, "We Saw Spacecraft Over Our Homes." Like I said, this is pretty interesting. Started off by saying that Suffolk has been hit by a pretty good UFO fever after a rash of very good sightings. And I got to gather through this article, a lot of times the information is kind of vague, that Suffolk is the county, and it must cover a pretty good size area. Now, it happened there was, on this particular night of the first sighting, there was a fireworks display weekend, and quite a large one. There was a lot of people out. And along with this earthly fireworks display, we had sort of an unearthly display. Now, there were a couple good sightings described here, and let's get right to them. The first one was from a lady, Angie Christie. Now, Mrs. Christie says she was walking her dog, and this was about 5 p.m., 5:30 in the afternoon, and it was Sunday, early evening. Suddenly she spotted a pulsating UFO coming in from west to east. It was a very, very big craft, and she was asking in her mind, she thought it was very strange that no sound whatsoever was coming from such a big thing. You know, here it was coming at her, and no noise whatsoever. It's more or less eerie. Then a few seconds later, she saw a smaller craft, another one coming in. This was much smaller, and it was coming in towards the large one. Now, this ship here was flashing red and white lights. The article, they didn't say if these red and white lights were maybe along the edge like running lights, or if it was the whole craft that was changing colors. I would venture a guess and say that they were the edge lights, the running lights along the rim of the ship. She was watching, and then all of a sudden a third UFO appeared. And this ship was altogether different configuration than the other two. And this ship was showing green and blue lights, and it was described as glowing. Now, she's watching all this go along, and suddenly Mrs. Christie said the skies all of a sudden became full of UFOs. And she was starting to get kind of afraid, and as this whole thing was unraveling in front of her. Now, the article, I read it a couple of times, didn't say she was walking her dog, but I would have liked to get a reaction from her, what the dog was doing. You know, was he scared? Was he trying to pull on his leash? Was he trying to hide? It didn't make any mention of that, but that would have been a nice point. Now, anxious now to get another witness, she ran into the house to get her husband. Now, this man is a former chief technical advisor with the RAF, so this man should know his planes. He should know what's up in the sky. Now, they watched the aerial display for some 2.5 hours, and it amazes me, some of these foreign sightings, how long these things just stay in the sky like that. And they had enough time to call a neighbor to have him come out and take a look. Now, this fellow here, he was an amateur astronomer, and he told him that he had never seen such a display in all his life. And keep going now, Mr. and Mrs. Christie still had some time to call her daughter and son-in-law. Now, I would imagine this was from another whole neighborhood. She had to go in and phone him, I think. She says, come over and have a look at the show that's over the house here. And they came over, and they brought several of their friends along. And this group of people was standing there watching all this, and they estimated that there was about 100 of these UFOs appearing on and off. You know, there'd be a bunch here, they disappear, then and they all, a lot of them looked different, like in those 3 different configurations. It was generally agreed by this group that they were flying, they were pretty far up. They were flying between some 5,000 to 8,000 feet above them. And the group also had a general agreement that the UFOs seemed to be making a sweep of the area, like they were looking for something, Mr. Christie said. And he got the impression as while watching this that, you know, they didn't really care if anybody was watching them or not. You know, they were up there doing their thing, and people were watching them. I'm sure there's some pictures out there, but this is probably a sighting you're going to hear more about. Now, this sighting here was more or less corroborated by another man, David Goddard. And Mr. Goddard was fishing off a place called the Felix Stowe Pier, and this was around 6:20. So this is about, you know, in the vicinity of the same time, when he saw 3 orange UFOs with a pink tinge to them, or as he called it, pinkish orange, and it sort of just loped in from the Woodbridge area at about 200 miles an hour. Now, all of these objects stopped shot as he was watching them, and then one darted off, and it was closely followed by the other 2, and as he watched the thing, they were heading out to sea and slowly just disappeared from sight, or quickly disappeared from sight. He said the entire sighting lasted only about 30 seconds, so he maybe just got a tail-end view of the big show that Mr. and Mrs. Christie and all those other people were watching. He probably caught the tail end, or sort of the end of it. And I thought that was a pretty nice sighting there out of that part of England. Now, we got a little time here to get you lined up on this next story. I can continue on the next one. But it was a pretty interesting abduction case. And the story's out of the Wales on Sunday, Cardiff, Wales. The date line was September 18 of 94. And I can see I'm really not going to get into it. I'll have to hold this off on the next show. The headline read, Aliens, I can let you off with this headline. Aliens kidnapped me in a spaceship. And believe me, it's a pretty good abduction story that took place about 9 years ago. And the individual's name was David Thomas, which the article pointed out, saying that wasn't his real name. And this little incident 9 years ago prompted Mr. Thomas to write a UFO book recalling this experience. So I should be looking forward, if it's not out already, to seeing something like this. But like I said, I'll continue this abduction one on the next show. And in the meantime, you know what you always have to do in the UFO field. Keep watching those skies. You might see a UFO. Bye-bye.